Here's what nobody tells you about money. You can have a good job, a decent salary, everything that's supposed to mean you're doing well, and still feel broke. It's not because you're irresponsible. It's not because you're bad with money. It's because no one ever taught you the basics.
I don't have to save $1 million to have $1 million. No, you only need to invest a fraction of it to get to that $1 million mark. In today's generation, especially with social media, everything is a need. That's a want. Everything is needed. Narratives on TV and hard that this generation is never going to be able to afford to have a house or never going to be able to have kids. Mark and I constantly are like, well, let's talk about that a little bit more, because
What's the secret weapon behind every top CEO and entrepreneur? A game-changing executive assistant. Hermessi gives you access to elite EAs who supercharge your productivity. From payroll and admin to social media and customer support, they handle it all so you can focus on growth and big picture decisions. These aren't your average assistants. They're expertly trained, thoroughly screened, and equipped with the latest AI tools to work smarter and faster. Ready to delegate and dominate? Get 15% off your first 2 months with code INSPIRE15. Don't wait. Visit Hermessi, that's HERMESSI.webflow.io, and take back your time today. Here's what nobody tells you about money. You can have a good job, a decent salary, everything that's supposed to mean you're doing well, and still feel broke. It's not because you're irresponsible. It's not because you're bad with money. It's because no one ever taught you the basics. Budget, save, invest, build wealth. The stuff that actually matters. Today's guests saw this up close, especially with their own kids, and realized this wasn't just a personal problem, it was a generational one. Steve Short spent 30 years leading billion-dollar corporate divisions. Mark Schlipman has spent over 2 decades helping people build wealth. Different paths, same frustration. So they teamed up to make money simple, practical, and actually doable for the next generation. I'm Linda Vo, and this is Inspired by Success. Without further ado, let's welcome to the show Steve Short and Mark Schlipman.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate
thanks,
it.
Linda. It's great to be on.
So, doing everything right, I'm just curious to know why smart people still feel broke when you're doing everything right, and why do so many people have good jobs, the decent incomes, yet they still feel like they're falling behind?
Yeah, it's a great question, Linda. And sometimes people just they don't think they have a game plan. They're working harder, and they think that's the solution. And if you don't have a game plan, you're confused. You're a little bit lost. So there's a lot of people that are saving money, and then they may realize, yeah, I am on track because I have a financial plan. I'm following a system of savings. So I think lack of knowledge and confusion does not help the anxiety that people have with money. And so I think having more education on the topic either changes your perspective or maybe some of your life habits to get you on that road toward your personalized goals and making sure that you've got actual steps. And I think that kind of motion in a plan actually creates less anxiety, that there's actually a game plan in place.
Yeah, because most people you don't get taught financial
Hmm.
literacy in school. And it's like a lot of people, you surprise me because I never thought twice about finance, investing, and whatnot until one book changed it for me, and that was just Rich Dad Poor Dad. And it was a simple book, and I think every school should have that curriculum. Like that should be a must in every school because
Mhm.
they don't teach that, and the education system is so outdated as well. And that's what I think people get stuck because they don't learn that. And I'm passionate about constantly learning about finance, but most people they still think saving is what's going to get them. They don't understand inflation. They don't understand about investing, or they're too scared. And I think it's our upbringing, our belief systems, and what they teach us in schools. And you guys have both worked with people around money for decades. So what's something that you see people do over and over that quietly keeps them financially stuck?
I'd say, and it falls right in line with just the education piece of it, is not having the framework to know exactly what they should be doing. And so through our book, we just tried to lay out very simple programs and processes to help people, because I think a lot of people know they should budget and they know they should save, but so many of us are good when we have a goal. And one of the things that we talked about early in the book is, what is your goal? What are you saving for? And, envision what that is. So you have this goal that you're going for. And then we have a model that we call the 50-20-30 model. And it's a 50-20-30 save first model, as we call it. But it's basically 50% to needs, 20% to savings, and then 30% to your wants in life. And a lot of times it's been out there. The 50-30-20 has been out there, which actually puts your needs before your savings. We thought it was better to do the save first on it. And for some people, 20% is not going to be able to, they're not going to be able to do it at first. But the main thing is it gives a framework, because I think a lot of people are like, how much should I save? I know I should be saving, and they don't really have a framework. This gives you a sum. You look at your salary, how much you're bringing home, and you just put it into those numbers. And once you hit that savings number, we tell people all the time, you should feel comfortable where you are. And that savings doesn't have to be yourself. That could be your company matching those pieces as well. And so once you have that framework, you can actually maybe sleep a little better at night, knowing that your future self is being covered because you're setting aside a really good amount if you can hit that 20%.
Do you think saving though? Like I know that now with inflation, saving. What are your thoughts on that? Because the money that's in the bank as a savings is going to be eaten away by inflation. So, can
Right.
you give me your opinion on that? Because there definitely should be savings for a rainy day, for example. But
Yeah.
I think
I think it also,
most,
there's a price. There is Linda, I think you're exactly right. And there is a price to have security. You know, having a mortgage on, or having your house insured with the likelihood that maybe someday it would burn to the ground. You can look at that insurance as an expense, but it's a necessary expense. And sometimes having the money in the savings for that, if you're working, 6 to 12 months, to make sure you've got that in savings in case, loss of a job or disability. But it's there. And so, when you think of some things that could possibly go wrong, it's there. And you're exactly right. It is getting eaten up by potentially inflation. And I think that is the price to pay to have it at bay. But, I do see a lot of times people, well, actually, I was talking to somebody this morning. I was working out, and they seem like they're a little financially stressed, and they're contributing to their 401ks, et cetera. And I said, "Do you have 6 months in savings?" And he says, "No, because it doesn't earn any interest. It's too. I like to keep it invested in the stock market
mm-hmm.
and my Roth IRA and stuff like that." I'm like, "That's all good stuff, but if you knew that you had all your bills covered for 12 months or 6 months, would you have less stress?" And he goes, "Yes." And it's like a light bulb went on in his mind that that's what he needs to do. Now, for some people, your risk tolerance is different. If you don't have anxiety about the short-term things that could go wrong, the pride of home ownership is expensive. A lot of things can go wrong, but just in life in general. So it is a price to pay, having money in savings. And do I think all your money should be in savings? We talk about it in the book. We have the called bucketing approach. Depending on if you're retired or you're working. But there's always going to be that bucket one we call the savings account. That's money we can get our access to. And then bucket two is that midterm, long range, short term range money that's like maybe 2 to 5 years. That's going to be invested maybe a little bit different. And then that long term money, which is traditionally for people's retirement plans, money you're not going to need for 5+ years. We do reference the book, some equity strategies like invest in an ETF of the S&P 500, for example, for growth in U.S.-based companies. But the bucketing approach seems to work really well for a lot of people. But a lot of times, in my situation this morning, talking to this person when I was working out, all their money was in bucket 3, and it was exposed to risk. They didn't have any bucket 1 money to get their hands on. So that created anxiety for that person.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard of having that separate bank accounts for that. As long as you simplified it by having 3 buckets. I've heard of people having multiple different buckets as well, and that's where some people just get freaked out and don't do it. But I think it also takes practice as well. But a lot of people also think money problems comes from not earning enough. So where does financial literacy actually fit into that? And how do you, why do people get confused, and how can they overcome that as well, especially when they're not earning enough? I know people that are spending way more than they should be earning, and I think it's a mindset thing too, because like when you see money in the bank, and some people have the urge to spend it. Even me as a business owner as well, when there's cash flow, I've got to condition my mind to keep that cash flow for. I've got a bucket for emergencies, but also not having to spend on so much that I don't need to, because I'm always thinking about growth and investments. So I want to put that money to work, But there's a few multiple different questions there. But first of all, when people think about not earning enough, where does financial literacy actually fit into that?
I think budgeting is where it all starts, and I know that freaks a lot of people out in terms of don't want to go budget and all this other stuff. But you do really need to have an insight as to where your money is going, and um, if you can follow the 50, 20, 30, and then the one part that I did leave off on that savings part is what Mark alluded to. The bucketing is so critical because just elaborating a little bit more on what he was saying, that short-term money, we don't suggest that you put it into the stock market because it could go down 25% tomorrow. And if you needed an emergency, you want to just put that in like a savings account. So that one does struggle, push up against the inflation like you're talking about. But the bucket 3, which is where most of your retirement money and all that stuff, that's 5 years out into the future. And so as Mark talked about, getting that invested in those, the S&P 500 international ETFs, there's just a lot of options that are out there. But the key is knowing where your money's going and being able to start early, which is one of the key goals for us. Is if we can get folks right when they start their journey of their careers to where they're not used to spending a certain amount of money, that's the most critical part, because that's when we all create our behaviors. And unfortunately, I was seeing it firsthand with my kids, which is one of the impetus reasons that we wrote the book, is that they were just living paycheck to paycheck. And they were luckily right out of school to where they've had maybe a raise or two. They could kind of reel it in a little bit. But if you don't know any different, why wouldn't you just live paycheck to paycheck? As money goes in, it goes out. This is great. I've got money in the bank, because no one taught them any other way to do it. And so that's why it's really critical. We want to get in front of folks right when they enter the workforce, just to be able to get them to think about living a certain way. And then it's so powerful when they start making more money, because now you get raises. You're used to living a certain way, and now all of a sudden you get some raises. Maybe you can just bank all of that additional salary instead of having your expenses go up. And there's some tricks in the book. We talk about just being really mindful of purchases that are only $400 a month or only $100 a month, because the marketing is really good. And I was one of those folks in the corporate world that was trying to get, you try to have some good marketing out there. And sometimes $100 a month or $400 a month doesn't sound like a lot. But by the time you do it and you factor it in over 5 years or whatever you're financing over, it really adds up. But more importantly than that, I would argue, is that you do that once and then you kind of forget about it a couple months from now. And so something else comes around. It's only $200 a month. And so you do that. And then it's another one that's $100 a month. The next thing you know, you've got these concurrent expenses that are just sort of piling on top of each other. And then at that point, it does get harder and harder to get yourself unburied from that. But we've had a couple videos we just posted on our social media recently that's talking exactly what you're saying. It's not so much just salary, but it's how your expenses are lining up with it, because Mark can give you countless examples that he made me aware of people that have really good salaries, but unfortunately, if their expenses are right in line with their salaries, you're in the same spot where you're just not saving any money.
So just say if somebody is making a really good salary and they've just got a pay rise or whatever, what are your recommendations in terms of, if they've got that extra income, what should they do with it? Should they invest in a business? Like, I know they should be investing in themselves as well, but should they invest in the stock market? What are your recommendations for somebody who has that little bit extra income, they've got a high salary? Because I know that what you said, I've heard of stories how doctors make heaps of money, but they end up spending it all because they're not budgeting wisely, and they're so used to that lifestyle as well that it just goes and it still becomes paycheck to paycheck as well. So how do we?
So investing in other companies. That's something that, investing in the stock market, S&P 500, some of the top 500 companies in the United States ran by some of the most brilliant CEOs, is one way. Invest in yourself, in a business, a side hustle to generate money. But understand what's an expense and what's an investment. And that's important. And that's why we really want to try to keep it focused on the 20%. So if you do get a bump in pay, 20% goes to investing in something, right? So not a lot of people have the intuition or maybe the knowledge to start a business, but by all means, that would be part of the future growth, would be a business, and entails a whole nother set of skill sets. But I tell you, Linda, the one thing that we also recommend for younger people that are just trying to find a way to save is one thing that we have people consider doing is, get your credit card statement out for the last 3 or 4 months and go through all the credit card statements and line by line, take a highlighter, and if you could push a refund on one of those or many of those items that you purchased, like a do-over button, what would it be? And so a lot of times people find out that they have like maybe a subscription to some type of service that they forgot to cancel, and it's $2.99 a month or $5 a month. Is that something you really need? And they consider canceling that, get that all cleaned up. But what are those purchases that maybe we shouldn't have pushed buy on the shopping cart? So we also don't want to mistake in our book, because there's a lot of great books out there. We're not advocating that you should be shameful for buying a latte or getting toast with avocado spread on top. I mean, there's a lot of those books out there that you shouldn't be buying high, fructose drinks and stuff. But we're taking the approach that if you're doing the hard work and you need to reward yourself, and that's where the 30% comes in, is go ahead and get that latte, and you'll actually probably taste better knowing that you're doing the savings as well, and you use it as a treat. But if you're trying to at least start saving, then there's going to be some areas that you may need to cut because just a lack of income coming in. But typically what we do see, Linda, is more is not always better. And when people start making more money, their lifestyle changes a little bit, and they find themselves in the same type of stressful predicament of trying to save as they were when they were making 10% less. So I think it's just a really good money habits that need to be taught early on and followed. So then as your income grows, that 20% still just 20% of your savings, of your earnings, I should say.
How often do you think, you mentioned good money habits, how often should somebody be checking the bank statements? Like, I think 3 months, is that, I think, too long? Ideally, should they be doing it every week or every month? Because if they're
Which bucket?
You talking about the short-term bucket, like your savings?
in general, how, like, when they're checking out, when you mentioned 3 months, they're looking at their statement after 3 months. How often should we be checking our financial records and our for good habits? How often should we do that?
Yeah, I think if people could shift the mindset that your number one business is your family, is your personal finances, that's your business. So if people would start treating their paycheck coming in as income from coming into a business, and so there's balance sheets with businesses. You should know your numbers. I think it's important. Are you moving closer to your goal or further away from your goal? Is there leakage in your portfolio where you're taking money out on the short-term bucket that you don't need to be spending money on? But also it's a tricky question, Linda. The reason why I'm kind of him-hauling around here is that if you got a long-term investment game plan that's for money for the long term, that's invested in, let's say it is stocks, that can make people very nervous when they see daily fluctuations of the stock market. But if you know that you keep on telling yourself, this is my 5-year plus money, this is my retirement money, that stocks are going to go up, stocks are going to go down. If you keep on adding to the bucket 3 portfolio, you're buying sometimes you're buying low, sometimes you're buying a little bit higher, but it all averages out over the long term to get that 9 to 10% average return. Not that the history will repeat itself, but it does rhyme in the future a little bit. So I think I caution people watching stocks on a daily basis, because your stomach gets involved and then your feelings take over. And when feelings take over, then that's usually when there's a derailment.
What about when they're checking this? Oh, go, Steve.
I was just going to say, yeah, if you've got your money set aside for your emergency fund, your bucket 1, like we talked about, and sitting in a savings account, so you don't really need to look at it because you know it's there and it's not invested in anything to where it's going to go down. And then to Mark's point, we always talk about in our presentations that this is money that's 5+ years. Just have confidence in that. And then look at the history in terms of what's happened with those investments over the long haul. Exactly like Mark said, 9-10% is sort of what they've historically done, but it's going to go down. It's going to go up. And it has nothing to do. You're going to retire. And, especially when we talk to the younger folks, that are in their 20s, like, you don't need that money for 30 years. In fact, it's sitting in an account that you could take it out, I guess, at a penalty, but you can't take it out. So don't even look at it. It doesn't really matter, because it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And you're just going to keep buying it. And you know what? If stocks go down 20%, you just got a sale. You got to buy all the exact same companies for 20% less than you did the day before. But I know sometimes that's easier said than done. But
And when it comes to our personal statements and our daily expenditures and looking at the expenses that we need to remove off, how often should we be doing that? Because, investments is one, but the expenditure, that the income coming in and how much we're spending, should we be looking and checking our bank statements on a weekly basis, or leave it till 3 months, just so that we can pinpoint what, like, I personally think shouldn't leave it longer than a month, just to see what, in terms of personal, for personal, my bank account, I'm probably the worst because I don't check how much I'm spending. But for business, I try to do that. Well, I have a bookkeeper now. I try to do that every week and just clean the books every week. But some people leave it pretty late until they realize, all this money has been bleeding from this subscription, for example. So, what's a good idea? Like, ideally, what's a good range of time people should be managing their
Yeah.
finances?
I think the timing is what a person feels comfortable with. If it's weekly, if it's monthly, whatever the rhythm is that feels right to them. But I really promote before the purchase some mental thoughts before you buy something, and really tell yourself, is it a need or a want? Do I need this or do I want this? And if it's something you need, then obviously, do your homework on finding a good price for it, and look at being a savvy shopper and coupons, et cetera, to get a good price on it. But really, it's really the front end that we find there's problems. No matter how many times somebody checks their books and records, if they're overspending all the time, it's not going to change things until you change the behavior. And so we're finding things need to be shifted a little bit more on the behavior side of what goes in the shopping cart, and keeping track of it. I mean, if you know 30% for once, and you're not checking it about every 2 or 3 months to see where you're spending your money at, then you don't have that mental cue in your mind of what your budget is to go spend money on fun stuff. So and then you look at just a lot of different things in the bills that you get from home. I mean, there could be mistakes. I mean, there's ways to save money by just being and Steve's a lot better at this than I am, as being a savvy shopper and a consumer. But he's been on the consumer side. I mean, he's been on the what would you say, Steve? Business side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I just to add to Mark's point, I think monthly. I mean, everybody's got their own cadence. I think monthly. I mean, that's what works for me. I'd talk to the younger folks that are out there, and it's not that hard, really, if you just set a certain time, say the 1st of the month or the 15th of the month or whatever, you pick it. And if you've got your investments all set aside, your 20%, let's just say you've got that automatically taken out and going into a savings vehicle brokerage account. We talk about how to do that in the bank. We talk about that in the book. And then you've got stuff through work and all that. You can, let's just say on the 1st of the month, you can look at what you've got in your checking account. Let's say you have a checking account and a credit card, or checking and savings, whatever. And you can just sort of see what you've got in that account. Then all of a sudden you can subtract out what you owe on your credit card balance, and what you've got left over is just a raw number. And then next month you do the exact same thing. And if all of a sudden that number's the same, then pretty easily, it takes you, 2 minutes to figure out, am I spending more than I'm bringing in? Or maybe I can save a little bit more? Or, last month it was $3,000. This month it's $2,500. I spent $500 more than what I was planning on, and monitor it or make changes to it. But that's a pretty simple, I think when people hear budgeting, they think they've got to get out spreadsheets, and they need to spend 5 hours going over a budget. And really, you can do it pretty simply with just sort of that example I gave.
I like that. And I'm just curious to know, you mentioned you guys have both got children. How do we teach our kids, what a want is versus a need is, especially, Gen Z, the younger generation? I know that they want things now. Like, how can we as parents teach that financial literacy to our children to make them wiser decisions? Like, sometimes they just want that now. Like my son, for example, he wanted to use all his money on a nice expensive shirt that was like $100 for a shirt. And I'm thinking, you're only 14. So how can I teach that financial literacy? And I told him, you don't spend more than you earn. That you're not earning income. That's savings from Christmas money. But you can't just keep asking your parents for money either. So how do we teach, like, what are the first things that we should teach them about wants and needs and how they can make them? Like, I try to encourage, you got to try to make your money work for you. Do you really need it, for example? Things like that. But what's any secret advice that you have to help the younger generation?
I don't know if it's super secret, but I think in today's generation, especially with social media, everything is a need. There's nothing that's a want. Everything is needed.
Yeah.
Um, I again, going back to the 50-20-30 model, that's what when my kid 14, they probably are not working, but maybe they are. But when my kids started working, that was one of the first things we did was just, okay, let's just put aside 20% to savings. Just make sure you've got that taken care of right off the start. And then that can help, hopefully, I don't know if it worked, but help frame sort of that mindset in terms of, okay, when money comes in, the first thing I do is I go put it aside. Hopefully that helped. But the other thing that we really talk about is delayed gratification, which is harder and harder, especially right now with social media. And so it's a powerful thing. And we've heard from a lot of people when we do our presentations that once they pick up that delayed gratification skill, it really is powerful because they just are not doing the do-over button, like Mark mentioned earlier, because they stopped themselves from going down that path of buying something. Maybe it was on an impulse, maybe they slept on it before making the purchase, but delayed gratification is a really powerful thing if people can harness it. And it's another one that people don't necessarily know about, but maybe when they hear it, they go, okay, I kind of know what they're saying because there's plenty of purchases over the last year I wish I could, undo.
I like that. Debt. I want to talk about debt as well because a lot of
Mhm.
people get themselves into a lot of debt. I've been there before with business, and it can definitely feel overwhelming. So when someone feels like they're buried by debt and they're hopeless, what's the first mindset shift that helps them believe that change is possible? Because I know it's so easy to get buried, especially if you got credit card debt and the interest rates just keep piling every month, and you don't feel like you're on top, you're just floating or drowning. So
Yeah.
that can feel really overwhelming. So,
I think the first thing, not to shame people, is really take a step back and they need to realize the past is history. All the bad choices and charges and stuff is in the past. And the next best decision is your next decision on how you spend money. So learn from your past, learn from your mistakes. You want to try to get out of your situation, and you should have a game plan to get out of the debt that you want to, attack first. But knowing that you're not going to repeat the pattern and you're going to make some fundamental changes in your buying habits is critical. Because if you keep on doing the same thing over again, we all know that's insanity and it doesn't work. And more is not always the answer if you don't change the habit. So I think it's just people just forgive themselves for the past mistakes, have a game plan moving forward. And there's all different ways to pay down debt. I mean, we could start with the lowest debt first, then work your way to the highest debt, then roll the payments into the next one. And I do kind of like that synergy that creates. A lot of times people try to pay a little bit more on every debt that they have, which that doesn't create any real momentum. So I do like some of the different approaches of tackling the small debts as little small victories to get those debts paid off. But don't, on the back end, what you're trying to fix, keep on repeating the pattern. So you may feel good about it, but then you get to a point, Because we're not about, Steve and I are not talking that you should, eat ramen noodles every night just to save money to pay down all your debt. But you got to get to a nice situation where you are saving, you're servicing like your debt on your home, for example. But we're also talking about you reward yourself. But you got to you got to have some boundaries on how you reward yourself. And I think people will enjoy life a little bit more with less anxiety. First of all, they have a plan, and two, they see that they're tackling their debt and making a difference.
I was going to add to that the 50-20-30 model is a goal. And we talked to a lot of people. I've got debt, I've got high rent, whatever the case may be. I'm not able to do the 50-20-30. And that's fine. It's just, that's a goal to get to. And again, that 20% includes matches from businesses and things like that. But Mark has said this many times with some of his customers, like, okay, well, maybe 20% doesn't work. Could you do 1%? Well, yeah, I could do 1%. That's no problem. Okay, what about 5%? And then just starting with something, I think we've seen too many people that just are stuck because they think the 20% is an all or nothing proposition. And it's not. It's just start. And then we've heard countless times, and the same thing would go with debt. Maybe I put 1%, maybe I put 3%, 5%. And then you don't notice that you're missing that amount of money because it just automatically maybe came into your account and then immediately got automated to go pay off whatever it is or get invested. And once you can start small, it really does snowball, and you do start to pick up some momentum, and that momentum becomes motivation for people because they're like, okay, I can do this. And they start getting the victories. And so just taking that first step can sometimes be the most important piece to it.
Yeah.
I like that. It's small steps. It's good. It doesn't seem overwhelming. And you mentioned automation, so I'm curious to know about the automation, especially over willpower, because you talk about systems over discipline. Why does relying on willpower fail? And what's the first thing people should automate?
I just think every day days start bleeding into weeks start going into months. And if you don't, we all have good intentions to sit down and like, okay, I need to sit down and put money into my savings, and it just gets hard. And so we talk about simple frameworks in the book that once you figure out what that number is that you're going to do, maybe through your work retirement plan, and then if you have money left over from that, it's very easy to automate this. And for the listeners that maybe don't know, you can set up a brokerage account with a Fidelity or a Schwab, whatever, and set it up to where say it's $100 a paycheck, and you get paid on the 15th and the 30th or whatever days those are, that you just automate it to whatever the 16th and the 31st or whatever, the next day. So when that money comes into the account, you never really see it, and it's immediately out of there and being put to use. It just, I think we all have a tendency to see, when we see things, we kind of can give ourselves a false sense of security because there's money in the bank account, but maybe we hadn't handled the other stuff. Unless we've done the 20% like we talked about. And if it is, then you know what? We're all for going to go have that latte or go on a trip or whatever.
Do you believe in that's just the dollar cost averaging DCA into your investments and doing that each time you can afford it?
Yeah, we got in the book, Steve will talk about a case study that we did that's done by Charles Schwab, actually. And it's interesting. Well, Steve, you go into that one.
You were doing great.
I was doing great.
Basically,
I was stealing Steve's thunder there.
No.
And I realized it when I started talking. So.
But it's basically just going into that, Linda, is just that they looked at folks that if you timed it perfectly to where you bought at the lowest point in the year for the S&P 500, as an example, or you bought at the worst time of the year, the highest point of it, or you just did it every month, or you sat on the sidelines because you knew the stock market was going to crash and you're just waiting for the stock market to crash. That one clearly was the worst of the group, but all the other ones were pretty close. So the takeaway that we highlight in the book is don't try to time it. Just automate the dollar. To your point, the dollar cost averaging is going to, work into your favor. Sometimes you're going to buy a little bit higher, sometimes you're going to buy a little bit lower, but in 30 years from now, when you need your money in retirement, you're not going to notice the difference between it. You'll just be thankful that you did the investing.
I like that. That's powerful. I want to talk about the Gen Z narrative because things are so expensive, especially in Australia where house prices are just ridiculous, even in America as well. And people think they can't afford a home for their families. Do you agree? Like, is this a bigger issue? Now I see on social media, instead of just like buying a home which they can't afford, the rent is they just rent and then they'd rather just spend the money and travel and enjoy life as well. So, things have changed from back in the days where interest rates were so much higher compared to now and the affordability of homes. So, what does building wealth look like now for this generation?
It's funny that you're describing what's happening in Australia is exactly the same thing happening here, and the narratives on TV and are that this generation is never going to be able to afford to have a house, or never going to be able to afford to have kids. And I know it's a little bit different, but Mark and I constantly are like, well, let's talk about that a little bit more, because if we're teaching kids science and algebra and all these other things, but we're not teaching any personal finance. So as we talked about earlier, they're immediately starting out with no emergency fund. Maybe they put some money into the stock market, but then they lose their job and then they pull it out of the stock market because they didn't have the emergency fund and they're living paycheck to paycheck. That starts a recipe that it does make it very hard to buy a house and have kids. But we're hoping that we can intersect the 20-year-olds now before those habits really get ingrained to where they can start making some moves and be able to afford homes. Is it different? It definitely is. But we're hopeful that there's things that they can do now that will still allow them to be able to get the homes, be able to have kids, and do the things that the generation prior was able to do.
My friend just I just remembered that my friend also, she's teaching her kids young as well. So she gives them an allowance and they're under 10, or one's probably 13, but that she gives them an allowance and she makes them have a bucket. So she has one for charity. I don't know, like she has a few buckets and makes them do that. And I think that's such a smart idea because now that you mentioned the like when you mentioned the 50-20-30 rule, it's such a great idea to teach our kids early. And I haven't done that with my son yet, but I'm thinking maybe I should do that because I just give him money. Every time he asks for money for food, that's all right. And I tell him to save, but maybe I should teach him financially as well to prepare for the future at an early age. This is your allowance. This is how much you should be putting aside for savings. This is how much you should be putting for investments, and then these three buckets I think should be enough. Is that and things that you want because they're a child. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that every parent should do?
Mark, what do you think? You talked
So
about the
how
envelope
old's your
method, I know, when we were writing the
yeah,
book, right?
we talk about in the book, it still works this day, but also just departmentalizing your money in your mind. That's what we talk about, the buckets. I mean, there's really no buckets, right? It's just
What?
No,
just
that
your
makes sense.
thinking in buckets. So, and we came up with the bucketing, at least I did many years ago, because it reminded me of my grandmother had envelopes, and in her envelopes she had birthday money for each grandchild, and then she departmentalized grocery money every week in envelopes. And so with my kids, there really wasn't an allowance. It was like they're getting compensated for doing work. There was really no free money per
Mm.
se,
Mm-hmm.
but I would hand them the physical money, and then whatever they did not spend, they realized that it went into their savings. And so giving them physical cash to go pay for things that they think they need, sometimes they turned out that they really didn't want to turn over that cash to get what they need. And they still bought their shoes and stuff like that, but it really got them thinking of themselves to be very disciplined with money. And my son is extremely frugal. Maybe I ruined him a little bit, but
Son of a
my
financial
How did
advisor.
my
What was that?
daughter's got a little bit of a looser leash and can justify a lot of things too. But But I think that kind of worked because I saw a trend. You know, people are like, well, I don't want to talk money with my kids because I don't want them, for whatever reason, to have to worry about it or whatever. But I think talking about money is it can be healthy. And I grew up and maybe it wasn't something we always talked about because maybe there's lack of it. I don't know. But I think it's good that there's not just this endless well of money that they think they can come to mom and dad and get. So we all raise kids different. Every kid's different. But I know that giving my kids money that they earned early, it gives us a chance to see what their intuition is to do with money. I mean, are they just blowing it? Are they blowing more money than they need to? I'd rather correct it early than wait until their 20s when they're out of the house and they are taught algebra and no budgeting.
Maybe even
Yeah.
adding on to it, we've heard from the book, and we've seen it in reviews from people that we don't even know that have said, and this probably isn't a surprise now that once we started seeing these, that if this generation doesn't know how to handle personal finances, guess what? Our generation never learned how to handle it either. And so either you kind of learned it on your own, or maybe you had a mentor that taught you that stuff. And so the next generation is not being taught personal finance skills because the older generation didn't know how to do it. And so a lot of people have commented in our book that this was great because it was a cheat sheet for me to be able to go through and talk to my kids. So the analogy I always use is I know how to drive, but I didn't know how to teach my kids how to drive without looking like an idiot in front of my kids. You know, do I take them out on the street? Do I do it in a parking lot? Like, I don't know how to start to teach them how to drive. And so that's the same thing with personal finances. I think there's a lot of parents that aren't educated as much as they'd like to be, and they don't want to start having conversations with their kids on it because their kids might be like, do you know what you're talking about with this? And so the book is helpful to be able to just like, oh yeah, this is the thing I need to talk about first. I do need to start in a parking lot with my kid to get them used to a gas and a brake versus going out on the highway. And so if that's one of the things that's helped, that was sort of, I guess, a surprise to Mark and me, is that there's a generation that's using this as kind of a guidebook to help teach it to their kids.
If there was one belief I want to know about the belief that needs to go. So if you could change one belief that people have about money, what would it be?
I honestly think any problem in life that money can fix is not a problem. And so I think if you have the ability to make money, how you save it, all that kind of stuff, it's the big stuff that are the problems. It's the illnesses that come up, premature deaths. That's the big stuff. And so, I mean, money is a tool. Money's a tool that can be used. Does it bring happiness? I think there's a point where it brings comfort and security. And Harvard, take it for whatever it is, not to put words in Harvard's mouth, but they did a 30-year study on what if money does buy happiness. And it was determined that huge amount of happiness in US dollars, from $50,000 to $70,000, the level of happiness is tremendous at 70,000. Anything beyond $70,000, marginal happiness. And then there's a point where it actually goes the other direction of having too much money and more responsibility starts creating unhappiness again. So if you're centered around money as being your happiness, the studies will show you that it's not much. So the reason why they thought 70,000 is that a lot of individuals can make $70,000 and still put a little bit away for college, have a little bit of savings, or a little bit of money away for retirement, a little bit of savings, and pay their bills. And if they can successfully pay all their bills and save a little bit, the level of happiness was tremendous.
Yeah, that's powerful.
That's a great one. I'd add this, the understanding the stock market is something, and not understanding it super detailed, but just there's too many conversations that I'm in, and I'm not even a financial advisor. I can't imagine Mark, in terms of like, it's a gamble. We even talk about it in the book. I don't want to invest in the stock market. It's just a gamble. And gambling to me is one person wins, one person loses. And that's not what this is when we talk about investing in an ETF of the S&P 500. You're you're in Amazon, you're in Microsoft, you're in all these huge companies that are there. Are they going to have bumps along the road? Absolutely. But is the chance? I think there's so many people that are afraid to invest in, say, the S&P 500 because they think their money could go to zero, and it hasn't yet. Could it? I mean, we'd all be in a lot of trouble if Apple went bankrupt. There's no more iPhones and there's no more all this other stuff. And so just people getting educated on kind of what they're purchasing and what the stock market's all about is so powerful, because people sit on the sidelines and then they aren't able to do some of the things that they'd like to because they're not able to get 9 or 10% returns. The S&P 500 has averaged 10% return over the last 50 years. Nothing is guaranteed, like Mark said, but if you really want to be able to find your financial freedom, it's really, you've got to put some money in the stock market, more than likely, and just watch that grow over time. One of the quick things that's in the book too is we have this, what we call 20 to $1 million method, which is really just putting the 20% aside. And we have an example in there that shows the power of time that somebody, and this was an example I used with my daughter, just an entry-level job, $50,000 a year US, setting aside 20% with company match and all that, you can get to $1 million in about 20 years. If the stock market returns its historical average of 10%, which it's done. And you'll have $1 million and you would have contributed $250,000, and the stock market and company matches and things like that are $750,000. Well, that blows a lot of people's mind. It blew my daughter's mind. She's like, I don't have to save $1 million to have $1 million. No, you only need to invest a fraction of it to get to that $1 million mark. And that's somebody that's not making $400,000 a year, it's an entry level job. Just setting aside that money, it's just that power of time on their hands.
Yeah, there's just so many tools of investment. There's gold, there's stocks, there's property, there's businesses. There's just so much out there, and I think so many people just get overwhelmed with it. So
Yeah.
doing something simple like that. I don't know. I did read when you said that, and it came to mind. I used to read that and agree with that too. But then I read another book by MJ DeMarco, and it's a book, Millionaire Fastlane, I believe that was one. I've read all these books, but he did mention that the myth behind that as well, because they don't talk about inflation though. You might get to that point, but the inflation is left out as well. But overall, I still agree that just it's better to invest in that, like what you said, the S&P 500 or an ETF, and as long as it has an average of 10% or whatever, it's just going to definitely beat the banks, for example. But
very true.
do you guys recommend any other investment strategies as well?
No.
No?
No personal advice, Mark.
No personal advice. Yeah. I keep it kind of general here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we really just focus it because that one's so easy to, we didn't really get into the details. We really talk about the buckets and kind of your mindset of how you should think about, safe stuff versus stuff that's a little bit more, I don't even want to call it speculative, because over a 10-year time period, you'd hope the stock market's going to go up. But
we also want to minimize excuses. So a lot of times people get so hung up on what to put their money in, they do nothing. Just put it in, save it. I mean, if you save it, you've done the hard work. Allocating it is an art that needs some little education, maybe some guidance. Steve does not need a financial advisor. I told that to him when I first met him. But some people may need some guidance. There's a lot of great resources out there. And then when life gets more complicated, you might need somebody to help you out. But all in all, everyone can get started. And we lay it out in the book. Very easy processes, how to open up a brokerage account, how to invest, etc. And we don't like to keep it complicated because it doesn't need to be. And we want to minimize the excuses of people have an excuse not to get started.
I like that. That's powerful. If someone listening did just one simple thing this week to move towards financial freedom, what should it be?
If you don't have a brokerage account, open one up.
Steve, do you have any other one simple?
That's the best line. No, I would say
that's pretty good.
Yeah, just start taking that first step. all the stuff we've been
Yeah.
talking about, because I think people do think it's, and especially now you talk about the younger generation. I talk to, not to bring up my kids, but my kids' friends and all that stuff are like, where do you get your advice? TikTok. I get it on TikTok. And so they get bombarded with 20 different, strategies on savings, and just take the first step and do some of the stuff that we're talking about here. Open a brokerage account, automate it to where it's just coming out with your paycheck. And next thing you know, you're going to have some good money in there.
Yep. Very good.
Awesome, guys. This has been a great conversation.
It has.
If there's anything I've left out, any key messages that you want to share,
I
and where
would
can people
say,
find you?
yeah, thanks, Linda, for having us on. We enjoyed the conversation a lot. I know I'm speaking for Mark, but our book is The Simple Road Toward Financial Freedom. You can get it at all the usual spots. We, on our website, which is simpleroadbook.com, it actually has links to our social media. Mark and I are pretty active in terms of, we've got a video just about every single week that's just a quick little 1 minute or less video that just talks about something from our book. Sometimes we don't even talk about stuff from the book, but just financial tips. And so we've got a lot of people that are interacting with the video saying, hey, this was really helpful. I didn't think about that. So that's something they could go to simpleroadbook.com. We'd love to have people to follow us on TikTok and Instagram, and all our socials are on there. And then pick up the book for the full roadmap.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Linda.
Linda.